Is Wolverine the Sisyphus of violence? I think there's an argument to be made that he may be, and I'm sure you know who Wolverine is, as he's, one of the most popular comic book characters of all time. Now, Sisyphus, I think there'd be a more reasonable explanation for why that name might not click with you immediately, but here's a reminder of who that is. Sisyphus was a king whom the Greek gods condemned for basically tricking them over and over again. His punishment was seemingly mundane though. It was to roll a huge boulder up a hill, but when he would get to the top, the boulder would roll back down and he'd have to start over. And this was his eternal fate. Pushing that boulder up, it coming back down, pushing the boulder up, it coming back down, so on and so forth. And this is the metaphor that we can apply to Wolverine and his futile attempts to escape from a violent lifestyle. Because as a character, it's been shown time and time again that while Wolverine can go into this berserker mode where he only sees red, he actually doesn't want to give in to that animal side of him. He doesn't want a life dictated by brutality. There's this duality to Wolverine where all of that is festering inside of him, but he's also trying to maintain a life of responsibility and honor, and we see that exemplified with a lot of his samurai history. But despite his heart and the emotional intentions, Wolverine almost always ends up having to resort back to the path of violence when it comes to solving problems and protecting the ones that he loves. Fate does not allow Wolverine to escape this, and whenever he gets close, whenever that boulder is at the top of the hill, it inevitably comes rolling back down. It really is a great tragedy too, because we've seen many an instance where Wolverine gets to show that he's actually a really kind and compassionate individual, and perhaps his life could have been drastically improved if he was never forcibly sent down this path to become a killing machine, a weapon. And so I think that's a great place to start, with Weapon X, the program that really changed Wolverine both mentally and physically. This is a definitive Wolverine story written by Barry Windsor Smith, and this is the origin of how Logan becomes Wolverine, of how he's kidnapped, experimented on, and gets a skeleton mixed with adamantium. And it's really essentially our X-Men Frankenstein story, as in our antagonist, the professor who's experimenting on Wolverine, is Dr. Frankenstein, and Wolverine is the monster that he creates. Definitely check this out if you haven't, by the way. The artwork and the page layout and the lettering and everything is just immaculate. I mean, even the anatomy on some of these drawings in here itself is incredibly impressive. It seems like this must have taken a long time to make. And I think this story is important for the thesis of this video because it kind of represents this lack of choice. Wolverine, for the first couple issues in here, is just forced into this vat, and when he eventually gets out of there, they're utilizing a device to control him because he's going to be their perfect weapon of mass destruction. You want to be a man? You want to be a human? You want to live a life? Too bad, you're a weapon. Too bad, Sisyphus. Roll that rock up the hill. And it's a tough story, but it's very impactful and it's very tragic. And on the subject of the art, by the way, we get him drawn in an extremely animal-like, feral way in this story too, which really contrasts with when he's trying to be more disciplined and honorable in other stories and how he's depicted look-wise there. So another good example of how they show the duality of Wolverine. Now he's essentially their remote-controlled Wolverine in here. They have him killing animals to test his skills, and eventually we get him starting to break free of that, and he's just still in that kill mode, and it's, at that point it's kill to survive and to escape really. So it just becomes this horror movie for this lab as Wolverine just starts brutally murdering everyone. But again, what was the choice here? It really seemed like his only way out was to lean into that violence. And the more he leans into the violence, the more vicious he gets with it, and the harder it is for him to pull back. And we see that as Wolverine starts hunting down the professor that's been mainly conducting this experiment on him. Wolverine cuts the guy's hand off even before he ends up delivering the killing blow, which I'm not sure if that's been retconned later or not, but hey, I'm going based off this story, and I mean, we see his body get incinerated. We saw Wolverine pushed to violence, and then we saw him kind of indulge in it. Next up, and playing off of that lack of choice when it comes to peaceful versus violent resolution, I'd like to talk about the events of Wolverine issue number 90. So there's some other backstory going on that leads us here, but the important context you need to know is that the madman that is Sabretooth is currently being held captive at the X Mansion behind this very strong force field. Wolverine is the only one at the mansion for the time being, and that's because the other X-Men are off attending to some X business that deals with, Age of Apocalypse and Legion and all that. But Sabretooth being there and being this unremorseful, homicidal maniac is kind of getting to Wolverine, and he's questioning whether to give in to his animal side and just kill him, or if there's any chance at rehabilitation for Sabretooth. But, as fate would again have it, That choice is quickly out of Wolverine's hands as Sabretooth brute forces his way out of the force field and initiates probably the greatest Sabretooth and Wolverine fight of all time. Even still, Wolverine has kind of this promise to the X-Men where he's not going to kill anybody, or at least he's not going to try to kill anybody. Like we're talking about in this video, he ends up having to kill all the time though. But Sabretooth really mentally gets to Wolverine because he tells him, he says, "If you don't kill me now, if this doesn't end tonight, I will kill everyone you love. Slowly. I'll kill Jean, I'll kill Cyclops, I'll take great joy in killing the young ones Kitty and Jubilee." And so Wolverine is right about to kill Sabretooth, and just as he snicks his claws into Sabretooth's brain, we get the Age of Apocalypse stuff. So reality ends around them, but the intent there was to kill Sabretooth once and for all, and I think he ends up just getting lobotomized later on when everything from Age of Apocalypse is sort of resolved and the reality fixes, but indisputably, Wolverine aimed to kill him there. But the violence Wolverine has had to turn to isn't always violence that is inflicted upon his enemies. He's had to be violent towards his loved ones as well. And a prime example of this that could be an entire video in and of itself, so I'll be brief with it, is his relationship with Mariko. The story of Wolverine and Mariko is one interwoven with love, rage, savagery, and compassion. In fact, Mariko has been afraid of Wolverine's more animal berserk side before, and it's caused problems between them, and then he had to prove himself honorable again, and he did that through violence also, but it was, I guess, more reined in violence. I want to specifically focus on the tail end of where Mariko dies. Mariko is kind of this metaphor or a representation, really, of Wolverine's quest for an honorable lifestyle, I think, and with her death, it seems some hope for that, being Wolverine's legacy, dies. But let's talk about her death because Wolverine is actually the one that ends up having to deliver the killing blow. Now, this isn't an instance of violence for the sake of violence, or violence as an extension of Wolverine's animal side. This is a more interesting case of violence that we see with Wolverine from time to time. It's a compassionate violence. So even when there's a choice for him, it's the choice of violence, or violence sprinkled with compassion. But, it's still violence at the end of the day. He's still pushing that boulder up the hill. In this instance, Mariko was poisoned by a member of a rival clan, and Wolverine ends up having to put her out of her misery, because otherwise she'd have a long, painful death. Another example of this compassionate violence has happened in a more contemporary book, and that is Powers of X. Now, this is part of the Moira retcon where she's lived multiple lives because she's a mutant, but it's interesting to note because in the end of her 9th life, it's Wolverine who has to kill her to send her back to the start of her 10th life with some newly found information that's going to help the world of her 10th life become a better place. But Moira says something to Wolverine right before he kills her to start it all over. She says, "This is what you do." And that appears to be true. He is stuck in this Sisyphean cycle of violence and murder. And there are many, many more examples of this over his history. I've just cherry-picked a few here. And this is part of what makes Wolverine such an interesting character and really such a tragic character. It is a tale of man against fate, and while we want to root for Wolverine, and we want him to overcome, we know how it ends, and we know how it always will end. Thank you guys for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a fun one to sort of dig in and look up some of the history of Wolverine, so please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts below.